Ethiopia has no navy, zero warships, zero coastal defenses, no ability to protect the sea routes its entire economy depends on. For decades, that sounded like a theoretical vulnerability. Now it's becoming a real one. Because the Red Sea, one of the most important shipping corridors on Earth, is turning into a battlefield. Iran-backed Houthi forces have moved to blockade the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Nearly 12% of global trade flows through this narrow corridor. And Ethiopia, Africa's second most populous nation, sits hundreds of kilometers inland, completely exposed to a maritime crisis it cannot influence. Imports slow, fuel prices rise, food prices climb. For 30 years, critics said Ethiopia's push for sea access was aggressive. But the Red Sea War just revealed something uncomfortable. Ethiopia may have been right, and what happened next could reshape the entire Horn of Africa. This is HornAfrica Insight. For decades, the Red Sea was one of the world's most predictable trade highways. Ships sailed from Asia through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, north across the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, and into Europe. Then the regional conflict involving Iran and Israel escalated. Iran-aligned Houthi movement forces began targeting ships in the region. Missiles, drones, naval harassment. Insurance costs skyrocketed. Shipping companies faced a choice: risk the Red Sea or avoid it entirely. Many chose the second option. Ships began rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope. That detour adds nearly 3 weeks to global trade routes, and the economic shock spreads quickly. According to international shipping data, traffic through the Suez route dropped nearly 50% during previous attacks. But here's the question most people are not asking. What happens to countries that depend on that route, but have no control over it? That's where Ethiopia enters the story. Ethiopia depends almost entirely on one maritime corridor: the port of Djibouti. More than 90% of Ethiopian trade flows through that single port system. Ethiopia was not always landlocked. For most of the 20th century, the country had direct access to the Red Sea through the ports of Port of Assab and Port of Massawa. But everything changed in 1993. After a long war of independence, Eritrea became an independent state. Overnight, Ethiopia lost its coastline. What had once been a maritime country suddenly became the largest landlocked nation in the world. And from that moment on, Ethiopia's economy became dependent on foreign ports. Today, most Ethiopian trade moves through Djibouti, creating a strategic vulnerability that leaders in Addis Ababa have worried about for decades. At the time, it seemed manageable. But the Red Sea crisis is now exposing how fragile that arrangement really is. Every shipment, every container, every fuel tanker. Ethiopia pays roughly $2 billion per year for port access and logistics. When Red Sea shipping costs rise, Ethiopia pays more. When ships delay, Ethiopia waits. And when trade slows, Ethiopia's entire economy feels the shock. But here's the deeper problem. Ethiopia cannot influence the security of the trade routes it depends on, because Ethiopia has no navy, no coastline, no maritime leverage. This is a maritime crisis for a nation without a coast. Look at the map. Ethiopia sits just a few kilometers from the Red Sea, but politically and strategically, that distance might as well be an ocean. Ethiopian leaders have warned about this vulnerability for decades. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed framed the issue clearly. 130 million people cannot remain geographic prisoners. At the recent Adwa anniversary, President Tay Atske Selassie described sea access as a question of sovereignty. For years, critics dismissed the argument. They said Ethiopia should simply rely on existing regional arrangements, but the Red Sea War changed the calculation. Because when trade routes become battlefields, geography becomes a strategic weapon. But something happened in December 2025 that may have changed Ethiopia's options completely. In December 2025, Israel officially recognized Somaliland. Shortly afterward, Israeli President Isaac Herzog visited Addis Ababa. Meanwhile, the DP World Port Expansion project in Port of Berbera continued. The United Arab Emirates finances the infrastructure. Ethiopia gains access. Israel gains a partner, helping stabilize the African side of the Red Sea. Suddenly, the geopolitical puzzle starts to make sense. Each actor solves a different strategic problem. Israel gains a regional partner, helping secure a vital maritime corridor. Ethiopia moves closer to the sea, access it has sought for 30 years. The UAE strengthens its growing network of ports across the Red Sea. And the war itself created the urgency that makes this alignment possible. What once looked controversial now looks strategic. Some observers ask a simple question: why not pursue sea access through Eritrea? Historically, Ethiopia used the ports of Port of Assab and Port of Massawa. But relations between Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki remain deeply strained. So what options does Ethiopia actually have? Geographically, there are only a few realistic paths to gaining reliable sea access. One possibility would be renewed cooperation with Eritrea, reopening the ports of Port of Assab or Port of Massawa. But political relations between Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki remain unpredictable. Another possibility lies to the east. The Port of Berbera in Somaliland has been expanding rapidly with investment from the United Arab Emirates. Some analysts believe this port could eventually provide Ethiopia with a strategic alternative to Djibouti. There are also longer-term possibilities involving transport corridors through Kenya or even Sudan. But each option comes with political and logistical challenges. What the Red Sea crisis has made clear, however, is that Ethiopia's search for reliable sea access is no longer just an economic issue. It is rapidly becoming one of the most important geopolitical questions in the Horn of Africa. For 3 decades, Ethiopia warned about its maritime vulnerability. For 3 decades, critics dismissed the concern. Then the Red Sea became a battlefield. And suddenly the vulnerability was obvious. Now, a new geopolitical alignment may be forming. Israel opens diplomatic space. The UAE builds the infrastructure. Ethiopia moves closer to the coast. The war changed the debate. The question is no longer whether Ethiopia needs sea access. The question now is how it will secure it. This is HornAfrica Insight, where the Horn's quiet moves speak the loudest.